On behalf of the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination, welcome to Jesuits in Space, Science Fiction and the Jesuit Imagination. I'm Professor Sue Scheibler, and welcome to all my students who are here. Thank you. So you can see I teach film, TV, and media studies in the School of Film and TV, and I basically focus on representations in film, TV, video games primarily. And I teach science fiction and video games. So there it is. It's all up there. So I am basically setting things up by talking about what is it about Jesuits in space? So we're going to start first in a minute, talking about what it is about this title that makes people smile and say, we have to come to this because what in the world is a Jesuit in space? And then for many of us, theoretically, we should all know the answer to this question, but there is that question is, who are the Jesuits and why are they in space? And is there something particular about Jesuits that resonates with science fiction? We all have different answers to that, so we'll see how we come up with that at the end of the evening. And if all goes well, if I do my job here, I will set things up for the next speaker, who is Professor Steve Mayu. He's a President's Professor of Rhetoric here at LMU, comes to us with great accolades from UC Irvine, where he taught for quite some time, a very storied career. He's the editor and author of several books, and most recently, Rhetoric's Pragmatism, Essays in Rhetorical Hermeneutics. So there you go. So we'll see what that means when he gets up here and, teaches us about hermeneutics and the sparrow. His discussion of Jesuit rhetoric and the sparrow, which will be coming up, will provide the framework for the last portion of the evening, which is a discussion about adaptation and the Jesuit imagination with Brother Michael Bro, who you will meet in a bit. Brother Bro is a brother of the Society of Jesus and a member of the Jesuits West Province. He is LMU's first Jesuit visiting scholar, graduate of NYU's Tisch School of Arts Professional Theater Training Program. He's a writer, director, and producer for stage and screen, and he has won the prestigious George Foster Peabody Award, which honors powerful, enlightening, and invigorating stories in television, radio, and online media. So that's who we are. On behalf of all of us, I want to thank Dr. Brian Traynor and the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination for giving us this opportunity to talk with you about Jesuits in space and the Jesuit imagination. And if I could turn this page here. And I also want to thank Dr. Tracy T. Meyer, who's down here, because it's actually because of her imagination that we're here. This started as one of these informal conversations that the three, Tracy and Steve and I, had about our love of science fiction and Jesuits and rhetoric and imagination and zombies and video games and, all the fun stuff we do, which was why we love our jobs. And out of that grew this event. And I want to thank Tracy because she actually made it happen. So it wasn't just a conversation. But here we are. So thank you for your energetic imagination and pragmatic ability to put this event together. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And so let's get started. So what do you think of when you think Jesuits in space? Some of us who grew up with the Muppet Show, we think of one of their best sketches that happened all the time was Pigs in Space. And we're not alone, because actually a character in the novel The Sparrow, George, says to Annie, it's so cool, when he first sees the asteroid spaceship they're going to use. Wait until you see it. The rock looks like this giant potato. All I could think of when I saw it was the Muppet Show. Spuds in space. So I'm not alone thinking Muppets, Pigs in Space. Many of you don't know the Muppets, but you should check it out. But anyway, I'd like to hear from you a little bit, just if you can shout out instead of doing something formal, just to get us going. What do you think about when you saw the title of this event and said Jesuits in space? What do you think? Anybody? Yes. Oh, yeah. Very cool. Excellent. Vatican Observatory. So we're going to talk about that, the relationship of Jesuits to science, and especially astronomy that puts them in space. What else? What else do y'all think about when you heard this? Jesuits in space. I can't miss that. Yes. Cool. Yes, excellent, good. And in the novel The Sparrow, which Steve's going to talk about, they do reference Star Trek quite often as well. So, yeah, excellent. In fact, there were some Star Trek episodes where there's some Jesuits floating around. Not floating, I mean, well, maybe, I don't know. Other thoughts? Couple more? What did you think about when you hear this Jesuits in space? Yes. Excellent. Good. Yeah. Hey, you're taking all my best lines, so now I don't have to say anything. Okay, good. One more, maybe. Somebody else have something? As soon as you say one more, we're all done. Is that a hand back there? Yes, sir. See? Seriously. Okay, there you have it. Thanks, everyone. So, oh yeah, there's that question. Sorry, I was a little late on that. So before we can talk about Jesuits in science fiction, I thought it might be great to step back a little bit and talk about Jesuits in popular culture, especially for me, film, TV, and video games. And one way to talk about it, and Brother Bro will really be able to speak to this, is how many people who are working in film, TV, video game development, literature, art, all of these ways of telling stories are Jesuit trained, either through prep schools, secondary schools, and universities and colleges. And this dates back, according to our own LMU Kevin Wetmore, who has written on Jesuits in theater. This dates back at least as far as Moliere, who was Jesuit trained and brought these Jesuit values and the Jesuit formation into theater. So it dates back, and we can talk about many of these. One in particular is Andre Brouwer, the actor. So it's not just creators, but also actors. He played the detective Francis Xavier Pemberton in the TV series Homicide: Life on the Streets, okay, known as Frank. The detective was a former priest who had left the priesthood and became a cop. Andre Brouwer is Jesuit trained, went to Jesuit prep schools, and he talks about how he was able to use what he learned from his Jesuit education to inform and round out this award-winning performance that he did for several years on Homicide: Life on the Streets. So that's one example of a performer bringing this in. Another example is James Gunn, who many of you will recognize from Guardians of the Galaxy. James Gunn actually was raised in St. Louis, attended St. Louis University High School, a Jesuit high school, and received his BA from St. Louis University, Jesuit University, and he speaks very highly of his Jesuit education. He said actually his Jesuit undergraduate education did more for him than his MFA from NYU or from Columbia. He also says in interviews that he actually was here at LMU for a couple of years as an undergrad in the early 90s, but as he said, I was pretty screwed up at the time and had to leave. So anyway, and then he went back to St. Louis. But these are just a couple of examples which I find very interesting. There are many more of people who actually are on the creative end, bringing their Jesuit education and values into writing. This includes people who have written science fiction series, Star Trek, the various Star Treks, Battlestar Galactica. The writer of that, who wrote Caprica, actually wrote it in our library with one of our philosophy students. So I think that that is part of it, is what we bring from our Jesuit education and our formation that then influences the creative parts of everything. But we're also interested in, primarily, Jesuits and how they're represented, because the way Jesuits are represented tells us a lot about the popular imagination. and what people think of Jesuits. And I tell you this, if you put Jesuits in a search on YouTube, there are so many conspiracy theories about Jesuits. I mean, it's all I got. It's crazy. I mean, they're all by the same three people, so, But so there's a lot of that. I mean, the Jesuits are behind everything, right? Even before the Jesuits existed, they were behind everything. But we can look at how Jesuits are represented as like the main protagonist or antagonist quite often, or a supporting character who's there to serve a plot point. And quite often when a character identified often as a Jesuit priest or someone who has been educated in Jesuit schools are there as a supporting character, they're often used as the ethical or moral compass in the series to remind people, and usually the main character where they're wandering off, especially in hospital and cop shows. It seems to be a very popular place for Jesuits to pop up and remind people of how to behave. Quite often, they are there to educate characters about philosophy, theology, and science, and history. And sometimes they're there to provide a cautionary tale against missionary zeal, and to kind of comment on cultural imperialism, naive tourism, and some other such concern. We're going to talk more specifically about the novel The Sparrow, but one of my favorites is the movie Jesuits in Vegas. I don't know if you've seen it. It's really a classic from 1991, and it's these Jesuits who steal money from the tuition coffers at their Jesuit university and go on a madcap road trip to Las Vegas. So there are a few comedies with Jesuits out there. So, and then, of course, our most famous Jesuit, which I didn't put up here, is The Exorcist. But you see some of these others, Man in the Iron Mask and whatever. So, and then there's also this movie, Amen, where a Jesuit learns about the gas being used by the Nazis and goes back to the Vatican to warn them about the Holocaust. It doesn't end well, that's the Holocaust. But it's very interesting in terms of these ways of figuring the Jesuits in this. And then you also have, besides fictional Jesuits and contemporary characters or stories, we have the more historical ones where it's about Jesuits as missionaries, especially in Asia and the Americas. In both Western films, and they're very popular in Chinese and Japanese films, especially Once Upon a Time in America, which if I had time, I would have shown you that because it's really great with the Jesuits. And they come off as kind of problematic, but then they save the day later on in the film. So it's, sort of. And then documentaries and others of these. And there's also some series where characters are nicknamed the Jesuit, and they're actually assassins, and they're not Jesuits at all. But yeah, Father Bro is nodding on that. TV, we have parish priests, especially in British TV. We have parish priests who actually help solve crimes. We have former priests who are helping to solve crimes, and scientists. And then current priests and all of this. So you see these kind of representations in all of that. And what you see in here is kind of these same things that many of you commented on: science, missionaries, exploration, curiosity, discovery, investigation. Okay, these kinds of things that people seem to associate with the Jesuit imagination, I think. But what I really want to talk about in the time I have left is Jesuits in video games. Primarily in Civilization 5. So because I think that if you understand how Jesuits are represented in this game, it actually helps us understand why Jesuits in space, in a weird way. So Civilization is a series. There's 6 now, is that right, my gamers? Yes, 6 now. And they're turn-based strategy games. They're also called God games, so that's kind of appropriate, I guess, for Jesuits. Where they were first released in 91, and now there's all of these games plus board games and expansion packs and all the things that we do with games. You achieve victory basically by creating an empire through, and they're called 4X because it's through exploration, expansion, exploitation, and extermination. And all of these terms, I think, when you think about how Jesuits are represented, and especially in sci-fi, that people associate with Jesuits in some way or another. The goal of the game is to build a civilization on a macro level, from prehistory to the future, or the near future. Each turn allows you to move your units on the board, on the map. You build, you improve your city, you go to war, you negotiate, and you expand your territory through extermination, military action, exploration, finding new unclaimed territory, expansion of resources, and then exploitation. Okay. The key to success is through three things besides military, but actually the real key to success is religion, education, and technological advances or science. So we're already in the realm of Jesuits, Jesuit education, and Jesuits and science fiction, I think. The games had religion at the beginning. In Civilization 4, they sort of moved religion out, but with Civilization 5, Gods and Kings, they've introduced religion again. And so this is it. So for our purposes, so in the game, religion consists of a series of faiths, and you can choose different religions and different faiths, and different beliefs. And as you go about this, you create bonuses. And the better your religion, the better your civilization, chances of success. But what's great about Civilization 5 is that one of your bonuses that you get is Jesuit education. So you earn Jesuit education bonuses, and that allow you to build schools, universities, research centers to explore science and technology that will help you create better scientific advances into the future and help you expand your empire. You also get to play two different kinds of characters, the missionary and the inquisitor. So here's one. So this is from the game. This is the missionary in the game. And here's a painting of a Jesuit missionary, so you can kind of see the relationship, a historical painting. So with the missionary, as you would expect, your primary goal is to infiltrate other territories and convert all of their people to your religion. And if you do, you get Jesuit education bonus points. They could drive you out because they don't like missionary zeal. But if you convert enough, now in terms of the Jesuit representations, they not only do evangelism, which is what the Protestants do, but the Catholic Jesuit characters also build schools, clinics, serve the poor, and other social welfare programs. So they gain more Jesuit education points by doing Jesuit service and not just converting the masses. So the more you do all of these other things, you get more Jesuit education points. I need to hurry up. And then the inquisitors are there to be inquisitors, to destroy the other faiths and protect the missionaries in this world. That's not a great picture of an inquisitor, but there you go. So according to a discussion on Reddit, the best way to use Jesuit education is to buy up research labs in empires and to use these in your technology. So just to wrap up, I think that this game, I don't know what that is, okay. So I think, oh, I know, it's an Inquisition, that's good. I don't recognize Inquisition, how is that, okay. This is an image. So you can read this. So for me, I think when we look at all of these things, we can kind of segue into discussion of the sparrow. Because as someone mentioned, I think Father Caro said this, Jesuits have always boldly gone where no one has gone before. And they even mentioned that in the Sparrow as this reference to Star Trek. With the same kind of problematics that humans have going into space in science fiction. So if you watch Star Trek or any of these series, humans are very curious. love to explore. We go wandering off into space in our own naive way. We have a prime directive, and we don't follow it every time. We always meddle. We think we know better, and especially when we see oppression or what seems to be oppression, the humans leap in. That's what science fiction does. But on the other hand, I think Jesuits are perfect for representation science fiction, because science fiction is the genre, I think, as a fan, where you can actually really engage philosophical, theological, ethical, ecological concerns along with the science itself. And so I think that that is a reason why the Jesuits have proven such fruitful characters through these science fiction texts, or this kind of Jesuit understanding, is because they resonate so closely with what science fiction can do, while also creating mayhem along the way. So I could go on, but I won't, because it's time for Steve Mayoud to come and talk to us about the sparrow. That's it. How do I? Oh, you got. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sue, and thank you, Tracy, for organizing all this. This is going to differ a little bit from Sue's talk. I only have 2 slides. One you're looking at, and then I have one at the end. And also, to keep to 10 minutes, I'm going to be reading most of this, but hopefully at a pace that I will be talking to you. So, what is this rhetoric? Anyway, now one popular meaning of the term is the rhetoric is just meaningless talk. That's just empty rhetoric. Or maybe the dangerous use of words. He tried to manipulate us through his rhetoric. But as my students know, the term also has a history of more positive meanings. One of those is the definition assumed in our own rhetorical arts course here at LMU. Rhetoric as the good person writing and speaking well for the public good. But we might also use a more general, a more neutral definition of rhetoric, one that encompasses both the positive and the negative. So can anyone here give me a more general definition of rhetoric that we could use? Anyone? Yes. Oh, great. That's a great. Yes, rhetoric has the use of language in a context to have effects. Language here, it's just that there were a couple of people that weren't in my class that were going to give me one of the definitions. That would have thrown me off totally. So sorry that I ignored you. So language here is understood as any kind of symbolic action. Not only the use of words, but gestures, facial expressions, images, and even musical sounds. This definition of rhetoric as the use of language in a context to have effects emphasizes effects, arguing to persuade an audience, using metaphors to figure reality, telling stories to entertain and inform. Now, the Jesuits have a long, distinguished tradition of using rhetoric in their various ministries to achieve effects. In their preaching to audiences, in their teaching of students, in their missions to proclaim the gospel in foreign lands, Jesuits became widely known as masters of rhetoric. skillful in shaping their use of language to fit their different audiences. Now, we can think of The Sparrow as a novel about Jesuit rhetoric. How the Jesuits and the other characters use language on earth and on Rakat to have effects. The characters intend their rhetoric to have good effects, to spread the word of God, to communicate with alien species, to make the world, indeed the universe, a better place. But the novel also shows the results of unintended effects, of catastrophic misunderstandings over words, misunderstandings that lead to political, ethical, and spiritual effects that no one in the novel foresaw. Rhetorical effects that lead to many deaths, that revolutionize a culture, and that devastate the faith of at least one lone Jesuit. That Jesuit, Emilio Santos, is presented as a skillful rhetorician, an adept communicator, one who goes into new situation after new situation and figures out how best to use language to have positive effects with various audiences. Whether college teaching in Cleveland, Ohio, or ministering to the suffering in the war-torn Sudan, or serving the poor back in Puerto Rico, his birthplace, Father Santos shows himself to be skilled rhetor, someone with the practical wisdom to see in any particular situation the available means of persuasion, as Aristotle put it. So prepared by his training and experience, Santos gained the practical wisdom to live with uncertainty in searching for the best way to understand each new unfamiliar context in which he found himself, and then say the right thing to achieve good effects in that new context. He thus seemed to be perfectly prepared to be a member of the Jesuit mission to make first contact with an alien race on another planet, or so it seemed. The disastrous failure of the Jesuit mission to Rakat is primarily a story of well-intended rhetoric gone bad, horribly, horribly bad, of miscommunication after miscommunication, of catastrophic mistranslations of language across cultural difference. The dramatic failure of Jesuit rhetoric is especially ironic because Father Santos is not only presented as a very successful user of language, he's also a student of language, a professional linguist who knows and studies multiple languages and language as such. Father Santos participates in the long tradition of Jesuit European explorers that Sue mentioned, who would go to new lands in the so-called Age of Discovery. Now, whereas other Christian missionaries often try to impose a sort of European version of Christianity on native populations in the Americas and in Asia, Jesuit missionaries first tried to learn the language and culture of indigenous peoples in these foreign lands, and then cleverly, respectfully adjust the form and content of their message to their native missionary audiences. As an anthropological linguist, Father Santos studied and learned the languages of first the Runa in Rakat and then the Janata in a typical Jesuit effort to communicate and use the language for positive effects, the native language for positive effects, to speak well for the common good, to bring the word of God and save souls. Now, all of these rhetorical aspects of the Jesuit mission to Rakat, the mission's admirable intentions to understand and communicate with an alien race, the Jesuit traditions of missionary expertise and rhetorical accommodation, Santos's training and skills as a communicator and a linguist. These rhetorical features of the story make all the more ironic the horrible outcome of the misunderstandings and mistranslations, leading to the suffering and death of mission members, a civil war among the native population, and the physical rape and resultant spiritual darkness of the main character, Emilio Santos. But it's also Father Santos's inner spiritual journey itself that needs to be more carefully examined in terms of Jesuit rhetoric, Jesuit language, Jesuit vocabulary, in order to better understand the significance of The Sparrow as a novel, as a speculative fiction about religious faith and doubt, about the search for God, about suffering and potential redemption. This is a novel about exploring the individual soul as much as about exploring the whole cosmos. So, I'd like to just note one of the most significant Jesuit resources for understanding both exploration within and exploration without. This is the Ignatian spiritual exercises, mentioned in an early chapter of The Sparrow. Now, as many of you know, the spiritual exercises were written by the founder of the Jesuits, Ignatius Loyola, a central text for Jesuit formation. The exercise consists of a series of meditations, contemplations, examinations of conscience, rules for ethical discernment. Today, these are performed not only by Catholics, but other Christians and non-Christians, and even by those that are not believers in any organized religion. The exercises are a set of instructions that a retreatant uses with a spiritual director, and I see mine out in the audience, to prepare to make a vocational choice, a life-changing or life-renewing decision. These spiritual exercises are one important source for Jesuit rhetoric. They provide a spiritual vocabulary for self-exploration and the basis for becoming men and women for and with others. The exercises present a language for thinking about one's inner motions as the retreatant contemplates his or her sins, the mercy and love of God, and the stories of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. One of the most distinctive types of exercises is what Ignatius calls contemplations of place, in which retreatants use their imaginations to place themselves in a biblical story. How would you act if you were a character at the scene of the birth of Christ, or an observer at the crucifixion? This use of imagination provides an opportunity to experience not just with the intellect, but through emotions and with the five senses. What does it feel like to be in that scene? What do you see, hear, smell, taste? And then what do you learn from that experience? Contemplations of place are just one kind of exercise offered by Ignatius to help prepare you to make significant decisions about the direction of your future life, and the spiritual exercises are part of the Sparrow. So, explicitly in its reference to the spiritual exercises, and implicitly in the internal struggles of the main character, especially Santos, the Sparrow presents the terms, the rhetoric of the Jesuit way of proceeding in relation to Ignatian spirituality and the search for God. Ultimately, then, one of the most remarkable things about the rhetoric of the Sparrow is the double way the author tells the story about Jesuits in space, the challenge of contact between alien cultures in outer space, and the struggles of each individual with faith and doubt in inner space. Thank you. So this was just published. This was just published this last 2 weeks, and so I just had to bring it as my other slide. Okay, and there's a whole lot we could do about we are not alone in terms of the universe and in terms of each of us as a person in our communities. But now we're going on to the next part of our. This is a conversation that I am going to have with Brother Michael, and you're going to come up here. I guess we'll do it here.
That was great.
Oh, thank you.
Really good.
Thank you.
You too.
So this is yours on there?
Is mine on?
Yeah, can you hear? Yeah, okay. So, Michael.
Yes.
How you doing? So we had a wonderful discussion, and I hope we didn't leave our game pitched in the bullpen here. So I'd like to just start in talking with you a little bit about your background. The title of this is Adaptations and the Jesuit Imagination for our conversation, and you'll see how talking about Michael's background will get us into talking about the sparrow. So could we maybe just start with your background in the theater?
Sure. I was always in plays as a kid and in college, and then I joined the Jesuits, and that continued. And so when it came time for graduate work, I went to School of the Arts at NYU in directing, and then just started directing in New York. So I've lived in New York most of my life as a Jesuit, with frequent interludes back in Los Angeles.
Yeah, can you just say a little bit more about the training at NYU?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a professional theater training. So you're trained by people who are already working in the theater. And as you know, when you go to a professional training program like that, the payoff for all the money and the time is you are kind of already have an entree into the field because you know all these people, right? And they hire you. So I was able to kind of move very quickly into working in the theater.
And working in what way?
Directing. I've directed in all across the country and in New York, all over the place. I've also done quite a bit of producing on stage.
Okay. What's the relationship between? We'll come back to this later. Between, let's say, producing or directing and playwriting.
I don't know that there. As my experience of a producer has been one of offering institutional support to writers, right? I've worked as a dramaturge for any number of writers in the United States. Being a writer, I kind of came into writing bass-ackwards. I was directing, and I was working with so many emerging playwrights and working on how they structure their plays and all that kind of stuff, that it was an easy switch to starting to write my own stuff. Right?
What kind of playwrights, for example, what playwrights did you work with during those early days?
John Guare, Lanford Wilson, Tennessee Williams, Edward Albee. I've been very fortunate.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate to work with some good people.
Okay, so the other part of your background that I'd like to explore is why'd you become a Jesuit?
Oh, it's such a personal question. But I guess that's why you got me to speak. I became a Jesuit because I wanted something. I wanted what they had. I went to a Jesuit high school, and I had, for those of you who read The Sparrow, I had a D.W. Yarborough. I had a Jesuit, or a couple of Jesuits, who were models of this alternate life, one that I had no imagination for beforehand. These were people who were intensely passionate, who were very loyal, who were funny, who enjoyed life, who went right out and who went right out and confronted whatever it is they were after. and there were men of faith, and I wanted that life. So when I started to flail around in my early college years, what am I doing? What am I doing? I thought, gee, I really want that life. And so I became a Jesuit. I was originally supposed to become a priest, right? So I was on the course for being a priest. All this time, I'm also having a career as a director.
After NYU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my provincial is dropping very heavy hints saying it's time for you to go study theology now. And theology is the last step before Jesuits ordained priests. And I found myself not wanting to go. What's more, I found myself not all that interested in being a priest, and it really surprised me. And I went to New Orleans, where I had gone to school previously, and to speak with C.J. McNaspy. McNaspy was a legendary Jesuit, died several years ago, who had been my spiritual director. I explained my problem to CJ, and I said, does this mean I should leave the society? And he said, no, it means you should be a brother, not a priest. And I went, really? And he said, look at the brothers in the early society. The early society had brothers, and they were almost all artisans or artists or architects, right? So the Jesuits brought them in knowing that to spread the word of the gospel, they needed the arts, right? And they used brothers to do that. So eventually, through a lot of rigmarole, I did precisely that. I changed over and became a brother. The key feeling for me was this, I'll tell you. I didn't feel the need, a pastoral need, to connect to people that I think priests must have. And I didn't feel that. That urge in me was satisfied by doing art. And I learned from that when students or friends would comment on a painting or a movie or a piece of music and say, man, it's like a spiritual experience. I learned that that's not like a spiritual experience. That is the spiritual experience. That's precisely the spiritual experience right there. And it was a huge lesson for me.
Yeah. And along those lines, and Sue's already touched on this, putting these two together from your background, the work in the theater and being a Jesuit, do you see that as a natural collocation, a natural
For me.
affinity? Yeah. Do you think that for others that also has been the case?
No, I don't. No, I don't necessarily think so. The majority of Jesuits in the United States are involved in social justice and education, right? I think that all Jesuits at some level are involved in social justice, no matter what they do, right? But there's very few Jesuits who do art and nothing else. Yeah.
Now, in the past, you've also been involved in other creative media.
Yeah.
I think producing and writing for television and for films. Could you just say just a little bit more of that before we move to the Sparrow?
Well, my favorite experience was doing Nothing Sacred for ABC 20th Century Fox, which was a program that, if it premiered now, would run for 10 seasons. It ran for one season, and the network couldn't wait to cancel it. They could not wait to cancel it. It was about a priest in a parish who doubts, right? And that was too much for corporate America in 1990, whenever it was.
Early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. People just couldn't handle that. And so it was canceled. I was always amazed that they ever made it in the first place. It just amazed me that they did this.
Yeah. So now I'd like to move over to talking more specifically, with that as background, about the Sparrow. Do you remember what you thought or how you felt when you first read the Sparrow?
Sure.
And did you read it right when it came out?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I did. Here was the one thing I love science fiction too. I'm a huge science fiction fan. One thing, the overwhelming thing was how Mary Russell got the Jesuits, how she got our way of talking to each other, kind of the irreverent brusqueness, the humor that we use amongst ourselves, for better or for worse. That was my overwhelming impression when I first met her. Boy, I thought, boy, she really, and I assumed that she must have Jesuits in the family or something. Little did I know she's Jewish, right?
Now, did you think when you read it, were you already thinking about things like adapting novels to? No, not at all.
No.
So how did you move from that kind of appreciation of what she did to actually getting to the point where you're going to come up with a dramatic version?
Well, I've always followed. The Sparrow is one of those famous Hollywood projects that never get done, right? There's a handful of them that kind of everybody knows about in town, and The Sparrow's one of them. Since it's been published, it's been batted from studio to studio to actor, and it's made a lot of money for Mary because they have to pay her every time this happens, right? But nobody ever makes it.
That was Brad Pitt's production?
Brad Pitt had it first.
Yeah.
Through Warner Brothers, I found.
Yeah.
But Brad Pitt made World War Z instead of this.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd always followed kind of but never as a real active participant. I mean, what am I going to have to do with that? I don't work within that studio system, so.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And so then when did it become a project for you? I mean, why would you even consider it or
Well, I'll
think
tell you,
about it?
my provincial called me a while back. I was working here in Los Angeles at Loyola Productions, and my provincial called me and he said, I had this off-the-wall request. Would you consider going to Washington, D.C. and working for the Jesuit Conference, which is the offices of all the Jesuit offices. It's the head office for the United States and Canada. And I was like, what? And he said, we want you to go there and develop websites and media for vocations, right? And I was like, well, number one, the provincial said, we want you to, so I'm going, right? But it's an example of boldly going where I don't know how bold I was. I was just like, all right, well, let's go, And so I went and I did it. So I was there for quite a while in Washington and really missing the theater, really, really missing it. And I got to thinking, I'd like to generate my own project in some way. And The Sparrow just, all of a sudden my eye lit on the book and lightning bolts flashed out of my eyes.
Okay, and so then you decided to contact.
Yeah, so we had mutual friends. I wrote Mary. She said, "Come on over, have lunch." So I flew over to Cleveland, spent a few days with her and her husband, and I pitched her my idea for a theatrical, a play based on, not a movie.
So what was the pitch?
Well, the pitch is. The bare minimum pitch is this. I said, Mary, I could play this story on stage with a 20 by 20 raised platform, a long table, and 10 chairs. I could do this. I wouldn't, but I could, right? So what I actually said to her was, Mary, here's the reason why nobody is ever going to make the Sparrow movie. It's because of the way Hollywood works. That Hollywood hears, all Hollywood, the people at the studios are going to hear is Jesuits in space. That's all they're going to hear. And immediately, that's a $300 million movie. That just is. That's how they think. There's no way around that. In order to have a $300 million movie, you need a major movie star. There's no Sandra Bullock role in this. There's no George Clooney role. Who are you going to hang it on? Brad Pitt's wrong for it, and he's too old now, right? So, those are called tentpole pictures, right? They're big, huge summer blockbusters. The point is that The Sparrow is not that kind of story. The Sparrow isn't really science fiction, I'd argue. It's more speculative fiction. It's not hard science fiction. I don't think, because she's really uninterested in the mechanics of how we get to space. I think she did her research and got the asteroid notion and all that. But what's the journey to her, as you stated over there, is as much about this inward journey that these people go through, right? And these colossal failures. What happens when all these good intentions are misconstrued and horrible, horrible things happen? This horrible disaster happens because they plant a garden in the book. Something as innocent as planting a garden increases the protein intake of the native inhabitants, who are cattle. They're livestock for the other race on the planet. It increases their protein levels, and they go into estrus, and they start having babies. And it throws the entire economic and ecological system of the planet out of balance, and war ensues, all from planting a garden. So, the parallels which you brought out, Sue, between the Jesuit missionary expansion of the 16th, 17th centuries, right? Especially the Jesuit missions to the New World in what is now Canada. It was called New France then. The Sparrow is an exact parallel to those stories. That's exactly what happened to the Jesuits there. They went thinking they understood what was going on, and they didn't. They put themselves in the middle of a gigantic war between two First Nations tribes that they didn't realize was going on. They were in the middle of it. They were slaughtered over and over and over again. It's a tale, I think, that needs to be, it's the dangers of missionary expansion, the dangers of colonialism.
So, but if you don't think that that's the primary thing that you would do in a dramatic version of it, would there still be a place for that in the
Yeah, absolutely. So my idea for I've got lots of ideas. The point is, none of it is going to happen.
Yeah, what is the state of the project?
Yeah. So Mary, when I pitched the whole thing to her, Mary said, "Sign me up. You're on. You've got it. You can do it. This is great." And then we ran into the lawyers. And Mary's agent had sold the property. Mary's agent thought she was selling just the movie rights to the property, but she mistakenly sold the entire rights to the property to AMC, who says, and this was several years ago, who say they want to do a series based on the Sparrow. The last Mary heard about what they were cooking up, the script included talking dolphins, various love affairs that Emilio has with, flora and fauna of the planet. Mary she has no say over any of this kind of stuff, right? She has no control. So what's happened is AMC refuses to relinquish control over the rights. Even though, were we to do a stage version, a successful stage version, brought to New York, would increase the value of the property and make the possibility of a movie actually happening much more real. But they won't do it.
But it looks like it's not going to happen.
Looks like it ain't going to happen.
Well, even though it's not going to happen, you have done a lot of thinking about how you adapt one media to another, one genre to another.
Yeah.
Had you done that previously? Have you done any adaptations?
Yes,
previously?
I have.
Yeah.
I did a bunch of different things, smaller stuff and bigger stuff. I worked quite a bit on an adaptation of Great Expectations, as a matter of fact, for story theater. My concept for, if I might,
Yeah.
for the Sparrow involves a lot. Those of you who know anything about the theater or from the theater department, involves using story theater technique in which the actors are telling the story to you. and change point of view, character, whatever, as needed, right? So any of you saw Peter and the Starcatcher, The Curious Case of the Dog, that Nicholas Nickleby, all those things are story theater. That's how I would do this, right? So I would do it with a cast of 12, equally men and women. The Jesuits would also play the two different species. The Jesuit provincial, Giuliani, I think. Huh?
Yeah, Giuliani.
Yeah.
Giuliani.
The Jesuit superior back on Earth would also be the Jesuit leader of the mission on Rakat.
Okay, I think I could do that.
Would you be available?
Yeah, I would.
I
Because
mean-
I have a costume, right? And this older guy, and okay, yeah.
My producer and I even went so far as drawing up casting lists, who we would nab for something.
Now, is there any bigger challenge in doing, or different kind of challenge in doing adaptation as opposed to an original screenplay or so?
Yeah, you don't have to make up the story.
Okay.
It's already made up.
Do you feel any obligation? I mean, certain people that
No.
really like the
No,
Sparrow.
no.
How about to the author? Do you feel any?
No.
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 Okay, so you're totally.
No, I have no interest in recreating the wheel. The wheel's been made, right? So what's the point of breaking that and trying to recreate it? By the same token, I know what is going to work on stage,
Okay.
right? And so I'm going to mold it to that effect.
Okay. Can we just have a couple more minutes? And so I don't want to leave on a negative note.
No, let's not do that.
So could you just talk just a little bit about your current projects of what you're doing here as the first visiting Jesuit scholar?
Absolutely. I'm working on a TV series, a 6-season TV series for premium cable. We're doing this on spec, which means there's no money up front right now, so it's wonderful that I have this opportunity, which is about the Jesuit expansion in the 17th century. Each season of this series is a different mission, right? So the first season is Edmund Campion in England, right? When Jesuits, to be a Jesuit is a hanging offense, when the ports are searched for incoming Jesuits, right? These are not documentary, by the way. These are narrative stories. The second season is the story of New France with Isaac Jogues and all that Brebeuf, those guys. The third season is India. Fourth season is China. Fifth, it goes on like that.
And is there any particular reason why you think there might be an interest in Jesuits at the moment?
Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
No, I think in Jesuits at the moment.
Yeah.
I have to tell you a great story. This has nothing to do with what you just asked.
Oh, that's all right. We're at
I
the end
saw
of
this movie.
Pretend I asked you a question that you could answer with this.
I was asked to do to put together a pitch for a exorcism movie over at Screen Gems, and I just did this. And the whole time I'm doing it, I'm going, oh God, why am I doing this? I don't really want to make an. So I put it all together. So I'm looking at exorcism movies, and there's not many that are very good. And I come across this movie called The Vatican Tapes with Michael. No, is that the one? That's no. Wait, this one has got Eric Bana, and do you know that movie? Yes, who said that? Deliver Us from Evil. Right? Who's the priest? Who plays the priest in that? No. Yeah. Well, whoever the priest is, and he's like this leather jacket wearing Jesuit. You know what I mean? He's smoking cigarettes. He's hard drinking. He's good looking. Already I hate him. And honest to God, at one point, this is so great. At one point, the Eric Bana character, who is this ex-Catholic detective, realizes that he can sense the murderer's next move. And the Jesuit says to him, you have the gift. He goes, what gift? He goes, discernment of spirits. Now, those of you who know anything about spiritual exercises, discernment of spirits is this long, involved practice that it's a spiritual practice. It doesn't have anything to do with ghosts at all. You have the gift. Discernment of spirits. You go click.
And I think on that note
On that
of
note.
misunderstanding, we're going to end. Thank
Okay.
Okay, so, can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah. We have, I don't know how much time, a little bit of time, for questions, conversations, anything you want to ask us? Or, I can't even move, how can I move this chair? Well, I can't do that. I know, it's weird. Oh, it's because of this. And Tracy, yeah.
I have a question, which is, you mentioned Star Trek and you do the Jesuits boldly go, and you also, clearly the Sparrow is a cautionary tale. You told a cautionary tale I didn't know about, the selling of Sparrow to AMC, that's also a cautionary tale. Do the Jesuits need a prime directive, like Star Trek, where you guys stop interfering so there aren't any more martyrs, and you're not messing with other civilizations or other people, but just doing something that doesn't create chaos and suffering for you?
You know the butterfly effect? I think that's a fruitless conversation. No matter what you do in an alien culture, it's going to have effects. Yeah. You can mitigate what you do, and Jesuits spend a lot of time talking about that in scholarly ways.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like if we, well, it's not up there, but if we did through the SETI program, National Geographic's articles about how it's really talking about there's got to be, we're going to hear from, if you don't do something, that's something. If you do something, that's something. If you do something in a particular way, that's something. I mean, part of what Russell's intention was to explore that when you have the best intentions, but it remains a cautionary tale.
And I think, I mean, getting back to just science fiction and the prime directive, and where the Sparrow and the sequel, where it almost seems like they have a prime directive and that doesn't work either. I think the thing in what makes science fiction so compelling is it is about this human, what does it mean to be human, and why we as humans can never follow a prime directive. And in all kinds of science fiction, so in Star Trek or some of these others, there's often some alien like Q who puts humanity on trial, much like they do in this, for constantly messing around with and coming in and creating chaos in this desire to free people, which is what happens in the Sparrow. I mean, ultimately, it is this desire. We see something wrong from our Earth view. We're going to free the people, whether it's Stargate 1, we're going to free them from the Goa'uld or from the Borg or whomever, right? And that gets them in trouble. And their answer is always humans are too young to be doing this. We haven't evolved enough to master the technology we're using. Does that make sense? And so it's also that in terms of, and to me, that's what science fiction is about, is these tensions. Which, like Brother Michael said, is the Jesuits in space becomes such a perfect metaphor for this entire history of Jesuit expansion. Until you get bonus points in civilization, and it's all okay. Then it's good to be a Jesuit. Even an inquisitor is good. So.
I suppose my question is for the whole panel. But I wanted to address something Dr. Mayu said, actually. When you were describing the failures of the missionaries in space as ironic, it struck me that if this tale is truly mirroring the stories of the 16th and 17th century, is the author, in your opinion, all of your opinions, condemning the practice of conversion? Do you see that the story and the culmination of the story as inevitable, or are there ways in which we can address missionary work and
You know, it's. I think it's interesting that they never get around to trying to convert anybody.
No, they never do. They get
No, in the Sparrow, that doesn't happen.
Right. That particular intention is not there. But if I take the question is further, was she condemning whatever it was that they ended up doing? If it was simply to make first contact, to open up some kind of communication between the two, to be respectful for. If you even have these good intentions, are you responsible for the negative effects that you have? And if we would go along the lines of author's intention, and if we were going to allow to use evidence outside the text, like the interviews that they've had, and there's some problematic things about using intention as a interpretive or evaluative device. But if we were, then clearly she was interested, at least initially, in saying, it's a very complicated thing, and she was responding partly to the Columbus. The condemnation of Columbus and others. So at least her intention was to show that it's really a complicated thing. And so I would suggest intentionally she did not write this as a way of condemning either missionaries in general, Jesuits in particular, or Sandos.
And if I could add, and this is where I think it is speculative fiction, but it's also the science fiction, because they go into space as scientists, as interested in this cosmic music, not as missionaries. The Jesuits are boldly going where others haven't gone, based on their Jesuit perspective on things in the arts, in the music, in the soul, and in search of God, or feeling that God is calling them there, but they're not sure why. So it is as much about them going as scientists, as explorers, as botanists. So they're all scientists, they're Jesuit scientists, not so much Jesuit missionaries. Is that
Correct. And
yeah.
they say they go to meet and listen to
Yeah.
God's other children.
Yeah.
That's why they're going.
Yes, and that's
There's no
exactly
talk of converting them,
No.
I don't think, in the book at all.
Yes, and they do. Yes, and exactly right. And they do say these are God's other children because only God can create some species that can make this amazing music, because that's what they're drawn to. They hear this music without understanding what creates that music. So they misunderstand the music, which I think is a rhetorical thing, as something very spiritual in God, and it's actually erotic and pornographic, but they don't know the language, so they don't know it's pornographic. They think it's angels. So to me, and I think that's why we say Jesuits in space, because they are driven by that Jesuit scientific impulse that goes back to, as people said, the observatory and the earliest astronomers and the Jesuit relationship, and how the Jesuits, when they went into Asia, brought science as much as they brought Christ. They were as involved in introducing science and scientific technology and learning the sciences and bringing those together. So, yeah, I think... So when we talk about missionary zeal, I think in this way it's the broadest sense of we're bringing science, but we're going to learn science from them, and this desire to boldly go and to encounter another species that must be also from God.
But you'd agree that when you're talking about science here, it's science, yes, science that understood in the broadest sense.
Yes.
That it's through science you can also see God in all things, and
Right,
so that
yeah.
there's not a separation for the Jesuits between the religion and the science. Those aren't two different.
Which is why the garden becomes, I think, so important, because the garden is science. It's botanists and it's architecture, because they create this beautiful landscape in this garden. So it is both beauty and seeing God in all things. And it seems like the most beautiful thing, and also practical, because they need the food. They're needing their own food. And then it is that garden that creates, as Brother Michael said, these horrible things that go on from there through this.
You know, it occurs to me listening to you guys talk too that I think Mary is also exploring her own
Yeah.
spirituality
Yeah.
there. Mary is a former Catholic who converted to Judaism. And I think she's looking at the Catholic God and the Judaic God. I don't know that she's making any, if she's come to any conclusions.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting that Sandoz's journey, I was joking with Steve yesterday that Sandoz has serious daddy issues, right? He wants a God who pays attention to him.
Because of his own father, his own
Yes,
childhood.
his own father was abusive.
Which comes out more in Children of God.
That's
I think,
correct.
right?
Yeah. And I think that Sandoz's God is not Christ. It's God, the missing Father, which God, the invisible one on top of the mountain, right? And I think that's a real interest. That's something that, were I to do the stage version, that's something that I would focus on.
Yeah. And I think you're right about her using the book to explore her own spirituality as she comes back to. I think in one of the interviews she says something like that. Writing The Sparrow was the last chance I was going to give to Catholicism.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And what she comes out as is converting to Judaism. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, over here. Hi,
Ah,
thank
sorry.
you. This has been fascinating. I'm tapping into the idea that the Jesuits have a tradition of embracing a rising technology, basically, whether it was the printing press in the 16th century, earlier radio work, early television work, and the tradition continues. I'm wondering, looking forward, what do you see as what do you see arising as a means of communication, and how might that change content as audience changes?
I think the biggest issue facing not just Jesuits but anybody with a brain and a heart in the Western world is the isolation that is brought about by increased reliance on technology. I think that's a huge issue with powerful ramifications across all fields. All fields.
Which
yeah.
has great potential for another Jesuit in space kind of science fiction story.
Really?
Yep. We'll talk later, but
God, that sounds fabulous.
I'll pitch the idea and then you can do it. I can see it already. Although I also see it as a video game, so no.
Aha, you might want to keep it to yourself. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I know that concerns Jesuits a lot.
Brother
John?
Michael, you already began speaking about this, but could you say more? If you were to make The Sparrow into a teleplay or a stage drama, what would be the main point of your production? Or what would be the main message that you would like to deliver?
Well, hopefully it would be Mary's message, right? Which it becomes clearer to me even as we talk about it. Like any real work of art, it's got so many levels that need peeling. And part of what happens when you're rehearsing a play is the other artists in the room with you tell you what happened, what is happening. An actor could actually inform a director of something the director was completely unaware of, right? The actor can say, well, have you thought about, or just by the way or a designer. A designer can say, it's really about concentric circles or waves or something. And he'll bring or she'll bring an image to you that suddenly opens up the story. So the collaborative element is nothing to be sniffed at in terms of like understanding a play. But in the long run, it would be Mary's story that I'd want to tell.
We have time for one more question. Somebody have a question or comment?
I have a general question for the panel. considering some of the characters, popular characters in science fiction right now that are not Jesuits, are there any sci-fi characters you would consider to be Jesuit-like or having the characteristics of Jesuits in current popular science fiction?
That's a great question. God,
And
I
we'll
wish
give
I
it,
had time
and
to
we'll
think
give it to
about
Sue.
that. Sue.
I would.
Sue, tell us.
Okay. I would say the arrival, the linguist, what I can't remember her name, the character.
Amy, right?
Yes, thank you. To me, I think you can make that case that, and again, I think it comes back to this bottom line of this kind of Jesuit imagination, formation, this scientific interest, but also this kind of compassionate encounter with the other. I mean, these ideals where you try to see, she doesn't use the word God, but I think that what makes that encounter so meaningful, if you look at it through a Jesuit lens, you could make that argument is this underlying seeing God in all things. So if you see God in all things, you see God in the alien, right? Does that make sense? And so you don't see it as a threat. You begin to see it as something trying to communicate, and you try to learn that language. So that would be one. I think you could also look at Shape of Water through a Jesuit lens as well, in terms of these same values, these kind of positive values, and that. So those would be two off the top of my head.
That's a good one.
Oh,
good.
thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there you go.
We'll stay with that.
So on behalf of the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination, I want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank you all for coming. I especially want to thank Emmylou Reyes, who this happened because of her. And I would like to invite you outside for a reception. So please, we'll thank our speakers, and then I invite you to go outside to our reception.
Thank you.